Please, close your eyes for just a moment. Try to recall the distinct, sharp scent of a blue Trabant driving down a quiet, tree-lined street on a crisp morning. Or perhaps, remember the feeling of a heavy, shiny aluminum 20 forint coin resting in the palm of your small hand as you ran down to the corner store. Welcome back to a time that lives forever in our hearts. Today, we are taking a gentle walk down memory lane to revisit 20 completely normal things we all did in Hungary during the 1970s and 1980s. These are the everyday habits, the unspoken rules, and the childhood adventures that shaped who we are today. Yet, if you tried to do any of these things now, you would find that they are completely forbidden, heavily regulated, or even absolutely illegal. As we journey through these forgotten memories, I want you to wait for the very last one. It is a deeply touching reminder of how we used to care for one another, a beautiful ritual of trust that has sadly vanished from our modern world. Before we dive into these beautiful memories, let us take a moment to remember how time used to feel. Back in those days, time flowed differently. It moved like a slow, quiet river. We did not have glowing screens in our pockets, demanding our constant attention. We had patience. We knew how to wait for a handwritten letter from a friend, and we understood the joy of anticipating the postman walking up the garden path. There is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology, our lives were somehow poorer or emptier. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were incredibly rich. Our wealth was measured in the deep, unhurried conversations we had on the wooden benches outside our apartment buildings. It was measured in the way neighbors shared a cup of sugar and how children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. We did not have countless rules governing every single step we took. We relied on common sense, community spirit, and a profound sense of responsibility toward one another. Life was perhaps a little rougher around the edges, and certainly a bit more dangerous by today's standards, but it was authentic. It was a time when human connection was the most powerful technology we had. Let us begin with a winter tradition that defined the countryside, the traditional winter pig slaughter, or as we called it, the disnovágás. Try to remember waking up before dawn on a freezing January morning. The air was so cold it stung your cheeks, and the breath of the men gathered in the courtyard hung in the air like thick smoke. First came the quick shot of homemade plum palinka to warm the blood and steady the hands. Then began the hard, communal work of preparing the meat for the entire year. As a child, your job might have been to hold the enamel basin to catch the blood for the morning breakfast of hagymásver, fried blood with onions. You watched as the animal was singed with a roaring straw fire, filling the yard with an unforgettable smoky scent. Grandmothers would be in the summer kitchen, their hands deep in sausage meat, mixing in generous handfuls of bright red paprika from Kalocsa. Today, the European Union and modern health authorities have imposed incredibly strict hygiene regulations on processing meat. Doing this informally in a dirt courtyard, without pristine sanitary conditions and official veterinary inspectors, is essentially against the law. But back then, this was not just food production, it was a sacred family ritual that brought generations together in perfect harmony. Now, let us step into the local grocery store, the beloved közért. Picture yourself as a proud 8-year-old, trusted with a very important mission. Your father is busy repairing the family Lada, and he hands you a few coins and a handwritten note. You run down to the shop, where the lady behind the counter, always wearing her signature blue nylon smock, greets you by name. You confidently ask for a loaf of fresh white bread, a bottle of sweet Traubi soda, and a pack of unfiltered Symphonia cigarettes for your father. Without batting an eye, the shopkeeper hands over the tobacco. Today, the very idea of a store selling cigarettes or a bottle of kőbányai beer to an 8-year-old child is highly illegal and socially completely unacceptable. Modern laws strictly protect minors from these goods. But in 1980, it was totally normal. The shopkeeper knew your parents. She knew you were not smoking those cigarettes yourself. You were simply running an errand to help your family. That profound, unwritten trust within the neighborhood was the law of the land. We felt so grown up, carrying those groceries home in a woven mesh bag, proud to be useful members of the household. Let us move on to family road trips down to Lake Balaton on the old Route 7. Imagine the family packing into a tiny, rattling Trabant or a boxy zigiguli. The trunk is packed tight with a cooler full of breaded meat sandwiches and perhaps a tent. But what about the children? You and your siblings were tossed into the back seat, completely free to move around. There were no seat belts in the back. There were certainly no heavy, plastic child safety seats. As the car bumped along the road, you might have stood up to lean over the front seats, talking to your parents. Or, as the sun went down and you grew tired, you simply stretched out across the entire back seat and fell fast asleep, lulled by the rhythmic humming of the engine. Today, driving with an unrestrained child in a vehicle is not just illegal, it is considered incredibly reckless. Seatbelt laws and child seat regulations are strictly enforced by the police for our safety. But back in those days, we traveled hundreds of kilometers with nothing holding us in place but the metal doors of the car. It was a simpler, more naive time when the open road felt like ultimate freedom. And speaking of freedom, think back to the playgrounds where we spent our endless summer afternoons. Do you remember the towering metal climbing frames, especially the famous rocket-shaped ones, the rakieta masoka? They were welded together from heavy iron pipes and painted in bright red and blue, though the paint was always chipping away. Beneath these towering structures was not soft, bouncy rubber padding, but solid, unforgiving concrete or hard-packed dirt. We would hang upside down by our knees from the highest bars, completely fearless. We spun on heavy metal globe spinners until we felt incredibly dizzy, sometimes flying off and scraping our knees on the gravel. Today, modern safety regulations have made these magnificent, terrifying metal playgrounds entirely illegal. Every piece of equipment must be certified, rounded, and surrounded by shock-absorbing materials. A rusty iron rocket over a concrete slab would be shut down immediately by municipal authorities. But those rough playgrounds taught us resilience. A scraped knee was quickly washed at the public water pump. A bandage was applied, and we ran straight back to climb even higher. Let us talk about a very specific scent that often drifted through suburban gardens and village backyards in late summer. It was the sharp, fermented smell of mashed plums or apricots, hiding in large plastic barrels in the garden shed. Grandfathers everywhere were preparing for the highly anticipated ritual of home distilling, making the legendary Hungarian palinka. They used handmade copper stills, often secretly assembled from spare parts, bubbling away over a low wood fire. While producing a limited amount for personal use has seen changing laws over the decades, the completely unregulated, tax-free, hidden backyard distilling that was so common in the 1970s is something authorities crack down on today. Without proper tax seals and official health inspections, selling or even producing large quantities of this strong spirit is highly illegal. But back then, every family had their own secret recipe. A bottle of clear, burning homemade palinka was the universal currency. It paid the plumber, it thanked the neighbor for fixing the roof, and it cured every stomachache or winter cold. It was the true spirit of the Hungarian countryside. Here is a memory that modern generations find incredibly hard to believe. Let us remember the blue haze of cigarette smoke that seemed to cover the entire country. People smoked absolutely everywhere. Imagine walking into a busy hospital waiting room and seeing doctors and patients casually smoking fetske or munkas cigarettes. Remember taking a long-distance train, where the smoking compartments were so thick with smoke you could barely see the person sitting across from you. Even on flights with the national airline, Malev, passengers would light up right after takeoff. In schools, the teacher's lounge was a mystical, smoke-filled sanctuary that smelled deeply of black coffee and tobacco. Today, smoking indoors, especially in hospitals, schools, and restaurants, is strictly prohibited by comprehensive health laws across the globe. Doing so now would result in heavy fines and immediate eviction from the building. But in 1975, an ashtray was an essential piece of furniture on every single desk. The smoke was simply part of the atmosphere, woven into the fabric of everyday adult life, as natural as the ticking of a clock. As autumn arrived, the neighborhoods were transformed by a very specific, nostalgic activity. Do you remember the golden afternoons in late October, when families would gather to rake the fallen walnut and chestnut leaves? Once the leaves were in a massive pile, we would simply light them on fire right there in the garden. The thick, fragrant white smoke would drift across the entire street, mixing with the cool evening air. We children would sometimes throw raw potatoes into the dying embers, waiting patiently for them to bake into delicious, ash-covered treats. Today, lighting an open fire to burn yard waste in a residential area is strictly forbidden by environmental protection laws and clean air regulations in almost every town. If you did this today, the fire department might be called, and you would receive a hefty penalty. But for us, the smell of burning autumn leaves was the defining perfume of the season. It was a communal chore that signaled the coming of winter, bringing neighbors out to lean on their fences and chat while they watched the gentle flames. Let us think back to our school days, specifically to the autumn harvest season. In the 1980s, it was a completely normal practice for middle and high schools to suspend regular classes for a week or two. Instead of sitting at wooden desks learning mathematics, children were loaded onto buses and taken to the local agricultural cooperative, the Termelőszövetkezet. We spent long, exhausting days out in the massive fields, picking potatoes, harvesting apples, or gathering corn. Our hands would be freezing and covered in dark soil, our rubber boots heavy with mud. We worked alongside our teachers, earning a tiny bit of pocket money for the school or for our class trips. Today, mandatory physical labor for school children in commercial agricultural fields would severely violate child labor laws and educational standards. It would be an absolute scandal. But at the time, it was viewed as a necessary contribution to the national economy and a way to build character. Despite the hard work and the cold winds, we secretly loved those days. It meant no homework, chatting with friends in the endless rows of apple trees, and feeling deeply connected to the land. Now, let us remember how our fathers and uncles took care of their beloved cars. The family Lada, Skoda, or Wartburg required constant maintenance. When it was time to change the motor oil, nobody drove to a certified environmental disposal center. Instead, a father would simply drive the car over a shallow ditch behind the garage, slide underneath with a wrench, and drain the thick, black, used motor oil directly into a metal bucket. And what happened to that oil? Very often, it was simply poured into a hole in the ground, used to paint wooden fences to prevent rot, or dumped on weeds to kill them. Today, this is a severe environmental crime. Dumping hazardous chemicals into the soil can lead to massive fines and criminal charges, as we now understand how it poisons the groundwater. But back in the 1970s, ecological awareness was vastly different. People were resourceful, using whatever means they had to maintain their lives, completely unaware of the invisible damage. It was a time of pure practicality, where the earth seemed infinite enough to absorb our small daily mistakes. Let us take a trip back to the glorious summer days at Lake Balaton. The sun is shining brightly, and the beaches are packed with families on colorful striped towels. Suddenly, you hear a loud, echoing voice calling out across the sand. It is a local woman carrying a massive woven basket covered with a white cloth. She is walking right among the sunbathers, selling warm, garlic-scented lángos, or perhaps freshly boiled, sweet corn on the cob. She prepared all of this in her small kitchen that very morning. Today, selling homemade food on a public beach without a mountain of hygiene certificates, tax numbers, and sanitary inspections is highly illegal. The food safety authorities would confiscate her basket immediately. But back then, nobody asked for a health permit. We just handed over a few forints, took the hot corn, wrapped in a simple paper napkin, and ate it with pure joy. We trusted the vendor completely because she was a familiar face, a part of the local summer community. And honestly, food has never tasted as magical as that hot lángos eaten right after a long swim in the silky waters of the Balaton. Let us talk about the freedom of the open road on two wheels. Imagine a teenage boy in the village who just got his hands on his very first moped, perhaps a bright red Komar or an East German Simpson. He would kick-start the engine, the loud popping sound echoing off the brick walls of the houses. He would speed down the dusty, unpaved roads with his hair blowing wildly in the warm summer wind. There was absolutely no helmet on his head. Sometimes he would even have a friend sitting on the back rack, holding on tight. Today, riding a motorized vehicle without a certified crash helmet is strictly forbidden by traffic laws and will result in immediate police intervention. It is simply too dangerous. But in those days, a helmet was considered a luxury or just an unnecessary nuisance. The feeling of the wind rushing past your ears, the unfiltered smell of the countryside, and the pure thrill of unrestricted speed gave us a sense of ultimate teenage rebellion and independence that is deeply sanitized in today's modern world. Let us step back into the classroom of a primary school in the 1970s. The discipline was strict, and the authority of the teacher was absolute. If a student was caught whispering during a history lesson, or if their handwriting in the lined notebook was unacceptably messy, the consequences were swift and physical. The teacher would calmly walk down the aisle, holding a heavy wooden ruler or a long wooden pointer. The misbehaving child would be instructed to hold out their hand, and the teacher would deliver a sharp, stinging slap to the palm. Or perhaps they would pull the child by the ear. Today, any form of corporal punishment in schools is highly illegal, classified as child abuse, and would result in a teacher losing their job immediately. We now understand the importance of gentle, psychological approaches to education. But back then, it was just the way things were. Parents did not complain to the principal. In fact, if you went home and told your father you got hit with the ruler, you would likely get another scolding from him. It was a completely different era of respect, fear, and absolute authority. Do you remember the phenomenon of the latchkey kids, or as we called them, the kulchos gyerekek? In the rapidly expanding cities, vast new neighborhoods of concrete panel buildings were being constructed. Both parents worked long hours, so children were given their own house key, usually worn on a thick shoelace around their neck. After school, we were left entirely to our own devices. We formed roaming packs, exploring the unfinished construction sites of these towering panel houses. We played hide-and-seek among dangerous stacks of concrete blocks, jumped across open trenches, and climbed up half-built staircases with no railings. Today, allowing young children to wander completely unsupervised for hours, especially near dangerous construction zones, would lead to serious investigations by Child Protective Services. It would be viewed as severe neglect, but for us, those concrete labyrinths were our kingdoms. We learned how to navigate risks, how to settle our own disputes, and how to take care of our younger siblings without any adult intervention. We were trusted with our own survival. Let us recall how we used to build and repair our beloved weekend houses, the small summer cabins at Lake Balaton or in the Buddha Hills. When it came to roofing the shed or putting siding on the garage, everyone reached for the same magical material. It was called Eternit, those wavy, grey sheets of asbestos cement. It was cheap, waterproof, and completely fireproof. Fathers and grandfathers would cut these sheets with circular saws, sending thick clouds of white asbestos dust into the air, while wearing absolutely no masks or protective gear. We children might even play with the broken scraps. Today, asbestos is globally recognized as a highly toxic, cancer-causing material. Its production, sale, and use are strictly banned by law, and removing it requires teams of professionals in hazmat suits. But in the 1980s, it was simply considered a miracle building material. We built our cozy weekend retreats under those grey roofs, completely unaware of the invisible dangers, focusing only on creating a peaceful place for the family to relax. Imagine the quiet mornings in the suburbs, when a very specific sound would wake you up. It was the rattling of metal cans and the slow clopping of a horse, or the puttering of a small truck. It was the local milkman. Women would step out of their houses holding empty glass bottles or enamel jugs. The milkman would lift the heavy lid of a massive aluminum churn and use a metal dipper to pour raw, unpasteurized cow-ass milk directly into their containers. The milk was warm, rich, and naturally separated, leaving a thick layer of golden cream at the top. Today, selling raw, unprocessed milk out of an open container on a dusty street is completely illegal under strict food safety and pasteurization laws. The risk of bacteria is deemed far too high. But we grew up on that milk. We drank it straight from the fridge, or our grandmothers boiled it on the gas stove, creating that sweet, wrinkled skin of cream that some children loved and others hated. It was real food, brought directly from the farmer to our doorstep, built on a handshake and a smile. Let us talk about how young people traveled when they had absolutely no money. In the 1970s and 80s, hitchhiking, or autostop, was practically a national sport for high school and university students. You would stand on the side of a busy highway leading toward Budapest or Lake Balaton, holding a piece of cardboard with your destination written in thick black marker. You would stick out your thumb, and soon enough, a stranger in a Ziguli or a Dacia would pull over and offer you a ride. You would get into the car with someone you had never met, chatting for hours about life, music, and politics. Today, hitchhiking is heavily restricted on major highways and is generally considered highly dangerous and completely unsafe. Modern parents would be terrified at the thought of their children getting into a stranger-us car, but back then it was an accepted and wonderful way to explore the country. Drivers were happy for the company on long trips, and there was a profound sense of mutual trust among the citizens of the road. Think back to the legendary pioneer camps, the Tabor, where thousands of children spent their summers deep in the forests of the Matra or Buk mountains. The absolute highlight of the 2-week camp was the final night, the closing campfire. Counselors and children would spend all day building a massive, towering structure of dry wood and pine branches, sometimes 3 meters high, right in the middle of a dry pine forest. When night fell, they would douse it in flammable liquid and set it ablaze. The flames would reach into the sky, sending thousands of glowing sparks dancing dangerously close to the surrounding trees. Today, lighting such a massive, uncontrolled fire in a dense forest during the heat of summer would immediately violate severe fire safety bans and forestry laws. It would be considered a catastrophic risk. But for us, standing in a huge circle holding hands, singing traditional pioneer songs while the intense heat warmed our faces was a moment of pure, unforgettable magic. We felt invincible, united by the glowing embers of the fire. Let us remember the bustling courtyards of urban apartment buildings, the classic gangos berhas. While these buildings were situated right in the middle of busy cities, the lifestyle inside the courtyard often resembled a small village. It was not entirely uncommon, especially in the 1960s and 70s, for families living on the ground floor to keep live poultry, chickens, or even a small pig in a makeshift pen in the back corner of the shared yard. You might wake up to the sound of a rooster crowing while hearing the clatter of the city tram just outside the main gate. Today, strict urban zoning laws, sanitation codes, and municipal regulations absolutely forbid keeping farm animals and livestock within city limits. You cannot raise a pig on a balcony or in a shared urban courtyard. But back then, the line between rural survival and urban living was delightfully blurred. People held onto their agricultural roots, doing whatever they could to provide fresh food for their families, right in the heart of the concrete jungle. Now, let us remember how children used to make their own pocket money. We did not get allowances on a bank card. Instead, we were scavengers. After school, boys would drag a heavy wooden handcart to the edges of town, sneaking into abandoned industrial sites, old railway yards, or active construction zones. We were looking for scrap metal, copper wire, heavy iron pipes, and stacks of old newspapers. We would load up the cart and drag it for kilometers to the local scrapyard, the Telep. The man there would weigh our treasure on a massive, rusty scale and hand us a few crumpled forint notes. Today, sneaking into industrial zones to take metal is classified as trespassing and theft. Security cameras, high fences, and strict laws protect these sites. Furthermore, scrapyards are heavily regulated and cannot simply buy suspicious metal from undocumented children. But for us, it was a thrilling treasure hunt. It taught us the value of hard work, negotiation, and the sweet reward of buying an ice cream with money we had earned with our own 2 hands. And finally, we arrive at a memory that perfectly captures the pure, innocent trust of our era. Let us remember the public soda water dispensers, the Sudash siphon machines, that stood on busy street corners, at railway stations, and inside small buffets. For a single coin, the machine would dispense cold, sharp, bubbling soda water. But here is the detail that is so shocking today. Hanging from the side of the machine by a short metal chain was a single, heavy glass cup. Everyone, absolutely everyone, drank from that same glass. A tired factory worker would take a drink, rinse it quickly under a small trickle of water, and leave it hanging. Then, a mother would hold that very same glass for her small child to drink from. Today, in our world of hyper-hygiene, disposable plastics, and strict health regulations, sharing a single public glass with hundreds of strangers is an absolute public health violation. It is unthinkable. But back then, we did not fear each other. We did not view our neighbors as sources of disease. That shared glass on a chain was a symbol of a society that lived, breathed, and drank as one community. As we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes clear that we do not necessarily miss the danger, the asbestos, or the lack of seatbelts. What we truly ache for is the profound sense of freedom, the unshakable community trust, and the beautiful simplicity of a time when people relied on each other more than they relied on rules and regulations. We miss the days when a shared glass of water united us, and when the watchful eyes of a neighborhood kept us safe. Thank you so much for walking down this beautiful, nostalgic path with me today. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue preserving our precious history together. Now, I have an important question for you. Which of these forgotten rituals do you miss the most, or what is your fondest memory from your own childhood in the retro years? Please, write your story in the comments below. I will be reading every single one.